All right. Hello, everybody. I think we're getting started here. Thank you for joining the session. My name is Panaki Kathiari. I'm CEO of Local Wisdom, and super excited that Joshua just said my name. Uh, we're I work for a digital communications agency called Local Wisdom, and we have a soft spot for internal comms. Our mission is to help clients, communicators like you all, have the time and headspace to be strategic leaders and influencers in their organizations because we're here doing more with less, and that keeps us in the tactical seat. And we'd like to take on some of that tactical work so you all could be more strategic in your daily lives. One of the core values at Local Wisdom is we learn by doing and we share that wisdom. So thank you, Contact Monkey, for giving this opportunity to share that wisdom. And thank you to our panelists today. Today, we're talking about creative ways to improve internal comms results. Basically, the theme is how do we do more with less? And, when I first heard about that theme, my mind immediately went to this story that I read a while ago. Just a short story. I actually don't remember the book where I read it. So if anyone knows, feel free to shout it out and you'll get a point or whatever. But it's a story about amateur motorcycle pit crew that were practicing for a race. And essentially the pit crew has to, like, when the motorcycle comes in and stops, they have to change the wheels and do like quick maintenance on it before it goes back off. And so they did all of this practice to get the fastest way to update the motorcycle. And when they went to the race, they saw that they just got beat out by an obscene amount by another pit crew. And while they were looking at how this other pit crew did it, they just noticed that they had one person who was actually unscrewing both tires with two hands with two wrench guns. They just never thought about that. So it was just kind of like a interesting story on how, like, sometimes how pressure and tight restrictions make way for real creative solutions, right? And so we have a fantastic cast of panelists here to talk about this. They came from an array of companies, sizes, industries, and situations. And I have the honor of facilitating this conversation. My goal is to squeeze as much knowledge from these folks as possible. I have some questions that I'm dying to know for them, but if you have questions, feel free to pop it in the chat or in the Q&A box up there. We're going to have time for that. And I also want to keep this interactive. So please use the chat to make some noise, echo anything that resonates with you all. Maybe we'll test this out. Let me pose a question to everyone in the chat. If since we're talking about creative ways to solve problems, what is your ideal space or scenario that puts you in a creative headspace? Essentially, where do you get your most creative ideas? So maybe we can pop that in the chat. For me, it's when I'm driving, precisely when I can't write it down. Right? So we have the shower, we have another driving. Gabrielle, we're like cousins from another mother there. The walking, traveling, nice. So while keep that thing running, I'm going to start introducing our panelists. So today we have Atif Khan, we have Audrey Anderson, we have Blair Glauber, and JD Norton. And we're just going to start off with some introductions. So I just ask you all, just introduce yourself with a brief summary of who you are, what you do, and what employee groups you support in your organization. And Atif, maybe you could start us off.
Absolutely. Thanks, Pinaki. And hi, everyone. It's great to be a part of this panel today. So I'm Atif Khan. I am a part of S&P Global. I am the internal communications lead for S&P Global Ratings, which is one of our 5 divisions. Yeah, I've been with this company or been with communications for almost a decade now and with the company for 15 years. So it's been a very interesting experience supporting communications for a financial services business, which is not necessarily the strongest industry where internal communications is put a lot of emphasis on. But we do that, and yeah, that's about it for an intro.
Yeah, thank you, Atif. Maybe Audrey, would you like to introduce yourself
Sure.
next?
Hello, everyone. Thanks for being here with us. My name is Audrey Anderson. I'm the Corporate Communications Manager for an engineering consulting company called Ulteg. And we've got 1,200 employees in 13 office locations across the US and Canada. And I'm a one-person team. So I pretty much support all our employees. Our top groups it's primarily engineers, but also the shared service employees who support them. So, and I always say my job is to turn employees into 1,200 brand ambassadors for our company. So that's what I consider my job to be.
Excellent. Thank you. And Blair, what about yourself?
Sure. Hello, everyone. I'm Blair Glauber, an internal communications manager for American Water. Have about 15 years of experience in communications, both internal and external. Currently, my role at American Water is focused on internal communications. So our employee base is about 6,500 employees. We have a team of 5 who support the internal function. We roll up into our corporate group, which also has our external affairs employees as well, and government affairs as well. In my role, I focus on corporate health and safety communications, and then I also support 4 states in our Midwest division, and that's about 1,600 employees. So through that, there's a lot of state leadership focused communication and planning, and then also the ever important job of translating our corporate message into meaningful content for employees. So glad to be here today.
Thank you. Last but not least, JD.
Hi, everyone. JD Norton. I'm the Senior Director of Internal Communications at a company called Thumbtack, which is basically a home care marketplace for the continuous care of your homes. So I've been here about 4.5 years. There's a team of 3 of us, and we basically support the entire business. I have one person on my team that's like an HRBP to our people team, but other than that, we sort of take on as much as we possibly can, supporting all of our executives, running all the company meetings, running our intranet, newsletters, sort of, IC 101. And so, yeah, we do a little bit of everything, but have to definitely prioritize because, everybody wants a little bit of our time and we can't give it to everyone. So a lot of that comes down to providing tools and empowering people to do it themselves.
Right on. And, I asked the chat, there's been a lot of chatter going on about this, where do you get your most creative ideas? Maybe we could go backwards from your intros. JD, where do you get most of your creative ideas?
Yeah, it's funny because the first thing that popped in my head when I saw this question was as I'm falling asleep at night. It seems like they always pop in there, and if you don't send an email to yourself, it'll keep you up at night. But I think walks. I love to go on walks. I walk every morning, and I think that's where I get ideas. Listening to podcasts and listening to sort of just what's going on, pop culture in the world. I get a lot of ideas that kind of just pop into my head when I'm out and about walking.
Nice. Blair, what about you?
Sure. So same with the falling asleep at night. I have a notepad next to my bed for that. But in terms of, how we're going to engage with employees, it's really meeting one-on-one with leadership. So I found that kind of setting standing meetings within all levels of the organization, all different stakeholders really helps because we need to, learn their voice, makes my job more efficient, makes messaging a little bit more sincere. We also have a lot of change in leadership. So he or she may be a state president one day and move up to the corporate sector, within the next year or something. And so, knowing their voice is really going to allow us to know kind of how they look at the vision of our company and, how they interpret our goals. So definitely those one-on-one conversations.
Nice one-on-one conversations. It's great getting to talk. And Audrey, what about you?
As I said, I work for an engineering consulting company, and I really get lots of creative ideas from talking with our engineers. Oddly enough, you might not think that, but whenever I do feature stories about a project they're working on, which of course I have no idea what they're talking about, but when I get to interview them, it's kind of interesting. I really love learning. So, and the other place I get creative ideas is oddly enough, from my colleagues in IT. And because they're on the cutting edge of technology and what's possible. So I will go to them. I meet regularly with them, and I will say, hey, I have this problem. Any way to solve it? And more often than not, they have an idea. So I have a great relationship with them, and I encourage all of you to lean into them. So
Fabulous. I think, yeah, both engineering and IT are some like creative teams. We just don't look at them that way. Highly problem solving teams. Atif, what about you? Where do you get creative?
And I think all the best ones are already taken, so I don't know what I can add here. But
It's just you.
no, to Audrey's point, absolutely. First of all, I'm not at all surprised that you get creative ideas from engineers. They're the best problem solvers. That's what they live and breathe. So definitely that rubs off. Partially, it's what Blair said resonates with me as well. It's about when I talk to people, that's where it's like an idea building on top of an idea and building on top of that. It starts sort of a chain reaction. So that's where the most creative ideas come from. But it also would differ for my like if I'm thinking about a comms campaign, specifically focusing on communications, if I'm thinking about a campaign or a message that I need to draft and I want to make a mental picture of it, shower is the best place for that. There is absolutely no beating that.
Nice. Absolutely. Thank you all for that. And I thank you all even in the chat for answering, right? You'll notice like none of your answers were like at my desk in front of my computer and whatnot, right? Because all of the creative ideas and things that we got, we're kind of pulled away from our daily normalcy, and we're in a place where we're safe and comfortable and just asking questions, and a bunch of ideas are coming at us, and we like pull all that together. And
it sounds like maybe
it.
somebody, yeah, I was going to say, it sounds like somebody needs to invent some dry erase markers you can use in the shower.
Yeah.
Don't like, like they'll come off, but not with water.
Yeah. Sure, there is something type of thing, but it is true. It's like when we're in our just safest place, that's when it'll come, everything. So notepads or your phones are nowadays like waterproof, maybe, right? They speak into them. And the thing about like creative ideas too, it's like we get really excited about them, especially when they solve a problem or achieve a goal, right? And it makes for a great story. So I'd love for you all to tell me a story of like a real world example of when you had to do more with less and get creative to solve a problem you were facing. And asking this question, it feels like NASA, like we're in space and we only have these three things. How do we like land a person on the moon? Audrey, maybe we could start off with you this time. Can you give us a story of like how you to do more with less and create a creative solution?
Sure. So I'll say up front, this is going to sound a little like a commercial, but I was faced with getting information out to our employees, as we all are, and our data showed that they sometimes, but not always, had the time to look at our intranet, all the articles I was posting there. But then we also had data that showed that employees did read their emails. So I thought I should do an email newsletter. What I did was I created a weekly newsletter, which is actually a recap of the week's stories as they appear on our intranet. And I turned to ContactMonkey to help execute that idea. I decided on a recap format because since I'm a one-person team, I didn't have the time to gather, edit, create new stories for a weekly newsletter in addition to the information I was putting on our intranet. So I just decided to make the newsletter into, here's the news you might have missed this week, or I used to say, here's the stuff you should have read. That's just in my head, though. I don't actually say that. And then I email it out on Fridays. And people really like it, and it saves me from duplicating efforts. So, and it's been a year and a half, and the weekly newsletter gets high marks in our annual communication survey, as well as positive mentions in our employee engagement surveys. So, and again, thanks to ContactMonkey's metrics, I can see that the newsletter gets some high percentage open rate. So, success story.
It sounds like the idea came to you when you saw the email data that people read email. Like, is that where the idea came from? Like, and how did you find that data people read emails?
Oh, well, we send out surveys. We do an annual survey, but we also have quarterly surveys that the HR department does, and we pay attention to what they say too about communications. So, nice. And I was just thinking, my boss was saying, how do we know how many people open up our emails? And I said, well, I don't know. So I turned to our marketing department thinking they must know, they must have a tool. But the tools they were using were very external focused. So So I decided to start. I started looking around and found Contact Monkey.
I like that. This is really looking at data and asking a really interesting, compelling question onto that. Yeah,
Yep.
thank you for that answer. Anyone else care to just jump in and share a real world example of doing more with less?
I
I'm
will.
happy to.
Go
Oh,
ahead.
okay. Blair, you can go ahead.
Sure. Not really technology related, actually kind of the opposite. So I think, we're a utility. We work 24/7. And during the pandemic, there was really sort of a realization that our field employees needed to be getting not only safety information related to the pandemic, but just, needed to feel a part of the team. Our employees in the office were working from home. Our employees in the field continued to work in the field. And so we really needed to create a way to communicate better with them. And one way we do that is through our frontline supervisors. And so we, traditionally would be commissioned for, let's say, talking points for state leadership and, executives. And we began doing talking points for our frontline supervisors. Um, this has helped because we're getting that message from A to B and we're concise, right? We're giving them bullet points that they could explain. And this is not just COVID related because we've carried it through to today when there's important messaging we need to get out to them. But we know that one-on-one conversation is important to them. We don't necessarily know if they're checking their emails. We can look at our Contact Monkey metrics, right? But we know that they're having those one-on-one conversations, usually weekly, if not daily. And we knew that's one way we can kind of make sure the message is getting there and getting there in a way that's easy to digest, right? Depending on the topic. So that's been a good method for us, I'd say, just to keep them in mind, to give them a tool in their toolbox.
Fantastic. Yeah, nothing beats the kind of like one-on-one conversation, and it's going to veer slightly away from technology, but keeping it more human in the process.
Yeah.
That way. Yeah, Atif, I think you had some
Yeah.
a story to share.
And it's interesting that you said keeping it human because that's sort of what this is about. I wouldn't necessarily call it doing more with less, but it was definitely creative. So this was back in 2018. We were just establishing our threat intelligence team, and they were basically a part of the information security team. They wanted to get the message out. They wanted to educate people internally on being more vigilant about phishing emails and reporting them, and not like how do you spot them? What does the threat landscape look like? And the challenge was that, well, how no matter how many training exercises do you do, well, like you can put it in your learning LMS and it wouldn't necessarily result in something. The approach that we ended up taking with this was we launched this monthly feature. We labeled it "Not All Heroes Wear Capes," and we literally took stories of threats that the threat intelligence team was observing on a regular basis, added some dramatic flair to it, not too much, but obviously, like people like drama, everybody wants a little bit of that. So added some dramatic flair to it, and we made that a recurring monthly feature. The readership was for that feature was through the roof. It was so popular, people waited for that. And we didn't just do that exercise in a vacuum. A year down the line, we actually looked at how many phishing reports we were getting a year prior versus where we were now. And we saw a good 25-30% uptick in like genuine reports, not reporting for the sake of reporting, but things that people actually found suspicious. So yeah, we just took to storytelling and captured that aspect of the human psychology to get the message across.
It's fantastic. I love the way you just mixed together like cybersecurity and like superhero fanaticism there in the mix. How did that idea kind of come about? Was there an aha moment somewhere along the line or anything?
Well, I wouldn't necessarily say that there was a particular moment that influenced that idea. It was more about, okay, we have this challenge. How do we do this? I personally am a huge fan of reading these or like these, drama in real life kind of scenarios, whether it's on film or it's written. And so that's what prompted this. Well, I couldn't be the only one. You look at Reddit, you look at other non-Facebook social media, and you see a lot of these things being very popular. People share these stories and get a good response. So we just took that same approach. We decided to try that same approach with our employees as well.
Nice. Some pop culture. JD, what about you and a story about doing more with less, getting creative with it?
Yeah, I mean, I think we can all relate to, the pandemic. I think that required all comms teams to do more with less. And we were a very, very in-office culture prior to that. So, half of our communications channels were in-office channels. It was screens, it was posters, it was things like that. And so, when everybody went remote, we lost half of our channels. And so, we had less channels to communicate through. We had less FaceTime with people. And one of the big things that we sort of realized was that it was very hard. Part of our office culture was just you saw everybody in the office. We only had 2 offices at the time. So you would run into the CEO and you could chat with him in the hall. You would run into the CFO in the lunch line. And it was just a common theme. And, everybody would sort of hang out and talk, and like water cooler talk was something that completely disappeared in the pandemic. And so we had to figure out, how do we get FaceTime when everybody's working from home? How do we keep our leaders visible? And so we completely restructured, we completely redid our meeting structure. And so we started doing 1 meeting a week that had a different theme and a different purpose that was sort of intended to reach all audiences, but in different ways. And one of those was our CEO's name is Marco. And we just said, Marco, you need FaceTime. We need to get you in front of the entire company for at least 30 minutes a week. So we named the meeting that. 30 Minutes with Marco was the name of the meeting. And it was a topic of his choosing. Sometimes it would just be him talking about like how he was feeling about the state of the business, the state of everything that's happening with the pandemic. Or sometimes he would have, project leads come on and talk about projects that they were working on or product launches. But the whole purpose behind it was really for him to dig into the why behind things and dig deeper into the context behind things that we didn't really have time to dig into, or we didn't want to send out a 3-page email to, say, here's the context behind, this new product that we just launched. One of our values is lead with why. So the whole purpose of this meeting was to lean into that lead with why and have the CEO lead that conversation.
Mm-hmm.
It's fabulous story, and it makes a lot of sense to provide that context that you can't get through like written form and whatnot. Cool.
Yeah, and exactly, and it's like in person, So I love not necessarily in-person connections, but vocal. I love the speech because you hear the inflections. The message comes across how you intend it to come across, not how somebody reads it in their own voice.
Yeah. And these are these like live sessions where like people could ask questions in that 30 minutes or right on?
Yep. Yeah.
Fantastic. So, I wanted to get into like the next topic about kind of some of the goals that you're working on. So those are some kind of stories of the past, and would love to learn some of like the future things, challenges and goals that you're currently focusing on achieving, and what constraints are making it challenging for you all there. Blair, would you like to start us off on this one? Like, what are some of the goals you have going on, and what's keeping you from getting there, or what roadblocks are there for you?
Sure. So operational efficiency is a big focus for us right now. Working smarter, not harder. What work are we providing that is of the greatest value? And you mentioned in the intro, Pinaki, about being task oriented. And we met, last year and talked about, do we want to serve as a function that just sort of takes orders, right? That people come to us, or do we want, a seat at the table where we can, continue to offer ideas and be seen as more of a partner rather than, someone there to do the task. Now, those tasks won't go away. And if we aren't, growing the size of our team, we still have to do those tasks, right? But just to be more intentional with them. Again, I support our corporate health and safety team, which is for the entire organization, and another plug for Contact Monkey, because we've started to, and not just in health and safety. I mean, one of our internal comms managers supports HR. We have another one on the environmental team. So, but we are able to sort of cross-train people outside of our function to use Contact Monkey, because it is very user-friendly. It takes sort of the design stress, I guess, out of it. I mean, I used to do things in InDesign, and now it's like Contact Monkey takes 20 steps out of that process, right? But I was just talking to her name's Jackie today, and she said, this is just so user-friendly. She's a safety professional. She is able, though, to kind of get that template going, get it started for me. We can collaborate on that. We still have ownership of it, and have kind of that ultimate say, right, on what it's going to look like, what it's going to feel like when it goes out. But now it's more of an editorial role that I play, and it's helped because we're really building partnerships in the business, and I think they get a better understanding for what it takes to get these products kind of out the door too. So.
Fantastic. Yeah. So that's a great thing to move forward on. It's kind of like shifting the role to be more strategic and guiding rather than just taking all of the orders. I love that. I'm sure there's a lot of people that want to pick your brain about that and that journey here as well. Audrey, what about yourself as far as any goals or results you're looking to achieve, and anything blocking or constraining you from that?
Sure. So I just had the opportunity to give a presentation to our executive leaders. And when I first started thinking about it, I thought, I'll tell them how awesome we are, because I had a bunch of data from our recent survey, like people give high marks to corporate communications. But then I thought, what do they care about? And so what I ended up presenting to them was that the goals of employee communications are to help engage and retain employees. And that really hit home with them, because the big issue on their minds is recruiting and keeping the best employees in this tight market. And so I was able to show them data on how employee communications was helping. So that retention and engagement is really the challenge, or really the goals. And the challenge is for our company is we are growing extremely fast. We're adding about 200 employees every year. Plus we have ambitious growth goals as a company. So there's a lot of changes and updates going on. You all know this. It's a challenge to keep everyone informed without overwhelming them. So the goal is to keep focused on the big picture, which is, driving for success. So.
Right on. Well, still juggling everything in the midst of it all. It's
Yep.
a challenge. And JD, I know you're at your offsite gig planning 2024 right now. What are some of the goals or achievements that are starting to emerge from there?
Yes. I think it's one of them is around sort of brand ambassadorship, which is something we talked about earlier. How do we create these brand ambassadors of every single employee, and how do we make sure that every employee is saying the exact same thing? Like, everybody should have the exact same elevator pitch for, what does your business do? And I think we're actually we don't. So that's something that we're talking a lot about in planning is how do we bring that consistency to the messages that we're sharing. But I think one of the things that we're really focused on achieving is earlier in the year, our employee engagement survey results came back, and as a side note, CommConnect has the highest engagement scores of anywhere I've ever worked. So when somebody's talking about low scores and they're in the high 70s, and I'm like, that's not, what are you talking about? That's not low. I've worked places where we're in the 30s. But one of our sort of focus area that was identified was employee understanding of our strategy and our vision and where we're going. And so, that is something that my team and I took personally. That is something that every employee should know what our strategy is. Every employee should understand it. They should be able to speak to it. And so that was something that we specifically took on. So we did half-year planning, and a lot of our focus was on helping improve those scores for the employee engagement survey. And, so we had to sort of look at that, like, how are we going to do this? And really digging in, once again, leading with why and digging into that, like, well, why do employees feel like they don't understand it? Like, what is it about the strategy? Like, it's really like doing the research. A lot of times I feel like internal comms are sort of researchers, because we need to find out what's causing the problem before we can help to solve it. And so, that was something that we really took on. And, it was, we changed, once again, we sort of changed meeting structures. We changed some of the things that we were sending out with leadership. We better engaged leadership. We gave them messaging that they could cascade. We were sort of, making sure that we were sharing more of that narrative that they could then cascade and share with their teams, gave them examples of ways to include it in team meetings and department meetings, and gave them examples of ways to, put it in their emails. And so it's like, if you give stuff to people, they'll use it. They just don't want to sit down and write it all themselves.
Mm-hmm.
So, and, our scores went up. So, we just got survey results late September, and our scores were up. So, we'll take full responsibility for that.
There is something there. Yeah, take responsibility for success. Love it. Everything in the other way. But yeah, interesting challenge that happens like in so many different like companies too. Like, how do we get on the right page and say the right thing and on brand and on message and whatnot, and in a way that's like, you feel comfortable saying it like in your own voice, right? Which is like the difficult piece of it, right? Too. Um, Great. Atif, what about yourself? What are some of the goals that you're focused on?
Well, I would say that the biggest one is becoming a better storyteller. And like I say that very intentionally, because if you, this goes back to one point, my 9-year-old was trying to understand what I do for a living. And eventually we landed on I tell stories. And so, how do we, as communicators, that's what we do, because that's what resonates with people. That's what people want to hear. Well, if you distill your strategy down to anything, it is a story of how you'll grow, how you'll evolve. So, essentially, the focus for me, both as a communicator individually and our group as well, is how can we become better at telling those stories? How do we make them more engaging? How do we make them more intentional and more meaningful? What is it that we want to gain out of that? Something that Blair said earlier resonated with me particularly well about how communications is having a seat at that table. So within S&P Global, we have already accomplished that. How do we now make ourselves even more effective? How do we influence that strategy? How do we strengthen that culture? And the way I see it, it comes down to how good are you at telling those stories of your people, stories of your business, of how the business is functioning, evolving, how the landscape is changing, whatever is relevant to your industry and your organization. How engaging is your story is what we are focused on.
Mhm.
Right on. Yeah, because that makes a lot of sense. Like, because we want things that stick and not just kind of fall into the same noise and look like everything else. I think out there, right? And how do we stand out from them and get noticed? I think that's really important, and I think that's all like it's all like problem solving and all like creativity, all kind of like coming hand in hand. How, and that's why I asked the question earlier, where do you get your ideas? And it's almost you have to like break out of like the everyday work routine to find something else truly like novel and interesting, right? Ratif is like cybersecurity and superheroes and trying to like things that don't go together really well, right? Like an auditor looking at data and email and said like, hey, these things could be mixed up together to create something different that we haven't done before here. I always think that creativity doesn't like thrive in all places either, right? I think it has to be nurtured in the workplace. There has to be like some level of like safety and level of understanding that we're going to try something and it may or may not work type of thing. But I wanted to take a moment to see how we all foster creativity in your workplaces for yourselves as well as your teams. So like, yeah, I would love to know what tips do you have to like nurture a creative environment at work, either for your comms teams, yourself, as well as like people you work with. And JD, I'm excited to hear your thoughts about this one.
Yeah, totally. I think there's a lot to be said for routine. I know that when I get out of my routine, it throws me off. But I also think that, when your brain is doing the same routine every single day, it doesn't have the opportunity to break out of that routine and do things differently and think differently. So I think you sort of have to force it. And that can be small things. That could be like just opening meetings with an icebreaker that's, interesting and fun and engaging for people to participate in, that gets their brains thinking a different way. Doing walk and talks rather than regular meetings. If you don't need to have a deck, then just talk about things, go for a walk in your neighborhood. I think it's things that can sort of help you break sort of that everyday cycle and break out of that just rhythm that you get into that kind of keeps you going. And so, I encourage my team, and, I try to not necessarily consume a bunch of media, but like stay up to date on what's going on in pop culture, watch TV shows and movies and, social media. And I think you'll get a lot of good ideas that way, and you'll get ideas that resonate with your audience, especially in pop culture, because there's so many things that people just, see, that everybody sees and everybody notices, and you can find ways to sort of incorporate fun, little engaging tidbits into your communications that sort of call back to those things. When somebody recognizes something, or if you use a quote from a movie or something that everybody's seen, they're like, "Oh my God, I know that. I can't believe they're using that in a video. That's so cool." It really engages people because they're not expecting it. And so ways to bring in the outside world, I think, is sort of how we nurture a creative environment.
I like that. I like that you said to, break free from some of the everyday routine and bring in pop culture. I love that idea, and I do that too. And it just kind of dawned on me right now that, like, as you were saying it, like, in the world of entertainment, there's a lot of research that goes behind it, that we don't know about. So, like, a lot of the things that show up on pop culture are coming through research that's already been done. So, like, JD, it's kind of like you're utilizing that research already throughout this. So it's very interesting. Anyone want to take that question on next? How do you foster creativity within yourself or your workplace?
I would.
Sorry, Chief. Go ahead.
I was just going to say what JD said. That is one of the biggest truths that you can take as internal communicators. When people come into work, they don't leave their personalities, who they are outside of that work environment. They don't leave that behind. It comes with them. And so if people enjoy YouTube Shorts or Facebook Reels, you can expect them to have a similar attitude towards short form videos in the corporate environment as well. The format is going to resonate with them. So take advantage of, or I would say particularly look at how social media is evolving, because that would be a very good indicator of what's resonating with people. Well, what is it? How do you make information more digestible and more relevant and acceptable to them? The other quick piece that I want to add is also we need to, as communicators, to the extent that we can influence it, whether with our stakeholders, with our internal customers, or within our own teams. But depending on how you operate, think about in-person interactions. Revisit how you view in-person interactions. A lot of us are hybrid now. That's just how the post-COVID world looks like. So when you're in person, make it intentionally for building connections and networking. Don't use that time when you're in person with someone. That should not be your time to focus on work. That should be your time to focus on the person in front of you, making that connection stronger. That's where ideas flow, in my experience. That's where, again, those connections, that's what sparks creativity.
That so beautifully said. When you have that person in front of you, it's not the time to just dive into the work. It's get to know each other. And I think, like, one of you said it earlier, I think might have been Blair. It's just like idea on top of idea on top of idea, and you don't know what kind of like flourishes in that. So that's fabulous. Thank you, Atif. Blair, would you like to?
No, I mean, I think mine was just more about our team environment. Like, so we've sort of restructured our meetings. We used to do the round robin. Everybody kind of do their report out. And we found that we weren't making the kind of connections with each other's work that we needed to. So now we just kind of focus on what projects are we working on. And then we all kind of chime in with, oh, I have a draft started for that, or I've done something similar. So really we're eliminating a little bit of duplication there. And it's just a more enjoyable experience, I think, than kind of waiting for your turn to speak or, trying to come up with things to say. I mean, we're all busy, right? But we don't necessarily want to read off our to-do list. So.
Right on. Fabulous. It's kind of like turning some of the structures that are like work structures and do it this way to a little bit more humanistic discussions or whatnot. Because you know what? That puts us in a more calm place and a more safe place for us to kind of create ideas as well. And again, it kind of creates that scenario where like idea on top of idea can start forming. Right. I think JD, you said in the chat a little while ago, what is it? You said and then or yes and right? Yes
yeah.
and
yes.
Powerful
And.
tool.
Yeah.
Audrey, what about you? Before we move to the next question, any ways that you kind of foster creativity and innovation in your workplace?
Sure, and it's not necessarily me, but I am part of. We have a very strong culture committee. They're huge advocates for engagement with employees, and one of the things they came up with is they had created a connectivity task force out of the culture committee to come up with ways to keep us connected, even as we go into continue our hybrid environment. Because as a company, Ulteg has not said you must come back to the office. So people are remote more than ever before. So how do we keep those connections? One of the things they came up with was just a wonderful idea. I thought it's called like coffee connections, I think. I don't know. Anyway, you sign up for this and you are randomly matched with another employee for, I think it's a 20-minute conversation where, you can drink coffee or whatever you want, but you are not allowed to talk about work and you just get to know that person. And I did it myself a couple weeks ago, and I was matched up with a person that I knew I'd worked with, but it was great. It was just really great to get to know him on a different level. So I would just say just the overall part of it is, get your culture. If you have a culture committee or culture council, or dive into that, because that's something that's people care about. You all know this. People care about culture as much as they do about their work.
Absolutely. That's I think the key point that I think in what you said is there's a level of serendipity behind it all, right? Because I think like innovation, creativity comes with some level of like serendipity. It's not our imaginations don't necessarily work like a machine that like clocks in and clocks out, right? It does what it wants to in that way. So whenever I have like creative, actually Atif was part of one of my creative design sessions last week. I fully utilize chaos and serendipity into the mix, because one, it creates interesting drama, like, ooh, who am I going to get paired up with for coffee, this week? And it kind of creates things that like you wouldn't think of otherwise, like, and mashes up things that you wouldn't think about, like an engineer and a communicator walk into a room and what kind of magic
exactly
could happen. Excellent. There's a lot of like good. So thank you all for talking through this and stuff like that. I'm gonna have like just one more quick question I'll ask you all, and then I'm gonna start looking into the chat, because I know there's a lot of questions coming in as well. So I know there's like folks that are like just wondering like what are some of like the resources, like, I don't know, tools, books, templates, apps, practices, mantras, whatever, that have helped you kind of solve problems that you run into others. Like what tools do you regularly go to, or if anything, that helps you go through this? And maybe Atif, I'll start with you there.
Ooh, that is. So for me, I wouldn't say there's one particular resource that I can call out.
Mm-hmm.
There are two things that I would generally do, especially when I'm thinking about a larger campaign. One is well, essentially engage what Adam Grant calls my challenge network. People that I know have a completely opposite way of thinking from how I would operate. I would get their input. So people that I know would not necessarily agree with how I think something should be done. I want to get their input. The other one, and this is the harder one, is my 9 year old. Trust me when I say this. I'm not kidding. I would sit her down. I would tell her, well, obviously bringing it down to her level where she can understand and be like, so what do you think about this? Kids can have the most out of the box thinking, and sometimes the most obvious solution that I, with my 15 years of experience, would be like, no, dismissive of, or not even think of, can come from her. So those are my resources. I don't have any podcasts or books, unfortunately.
Nice. Latif and I are going to go into business and like consult out our children for creative ideas moving forward. Review your work with our children and stuff because it's a fantastic idea. Right on. Anyone else want to like add on like resources to that? I should say I think that's a brilliant thing too because like as you want to get feedback, I think a lot of people are afraid to ask people for feedback just because they're afraid of feedback. But I think one of the things that counter that is just ask as many people, what do you think about this and what's your take on this type of thing, and particularly a 9-year-old, because it's going to be uninhibited, really.
If you can explain it to a 9-year-old, then everybody else should be able to understand it as well.
Right.
I guess since I popped up, I might as well go right now.
There you go.
I would say a tool. One thing that I would recommend to people, especially internal any communicators, is this process called message mapping. Some people use it all the time, when they're launching big messaging or big projects, big initiatives. But, other people, especially maybe if you're just getting started in the field of comms, you haven't heard of it. But, message mapping really helps you sort of align on, what it is that you want to say, how you want to say it, your audience, like all of the different sub messages that's part of it. It's a really cool sort of tool and process to go through. And once you sort of learn the process, then you don't necessarily have to use the like actually do it. Like you can kind of start to do it in your head. You're like, okay, I know I need to do this, and these people need to be involved, and there's this message and this message, but this is also going on over here. It's a really cool practice, and so I would encourage people to look into it.
Absolutely. And I guess serendipitously on that, Brielle from my team posted in the chat this local wisdom combo meals template, which is basically a template that we created that just helps you create like just out of the box solutions for 80% of the things that are already going to come at you. So it's like creating canned mini campaigns for things that are going to happen over and over again. So you don't have to reinvent the wheel to get some more time back. I think it's akin to message mapping and kind of figuring out the message, the audience, the technology to get there. But thank you. I think having like templates and frameworks so that you could keep some level of consistency and speed helps out a lot, type of thing. And I think those things, like we talked a little bit about changing things up. So there's like this kind of balance between keeping this like routine as well as switching it up every now and then, right? Because we want routine to keep things moving fast and efficient. We want to change it up every now and then to keep everybody on their toes and keep it more interesting and, try to figure out what's a better way to communicate this. So fabulous. I'll ask Audrey if you have any tools or tips or tricks that you stay creative.
Well, I'll tell you, JD kind of stole my thunder. I was going to say social media and pop culture, because that's what I look for inspiration for. What's the latest thing? So.
Right on. No, all good. I think it's the idea. It's like kind of go to where the people are. Actually, I found it fascinating. I found myself on like YouTube every now and then just to add on to that. And I found myself like watching interviews of like influencers, these like kids who are influencers, but they're getting like 1 million+ views on their YouTube shorts and their TikTok videos. And it's fascinating to hear how they're thinking about, one, the data, as well as their content and the frameworks that they use to like create it and little tips that they have. And I think that's going to be like vastly important, because that's going to be the next generation that's coming into the workforce. So we need to know how they consume information. It's going to be different than the way we've been used to all this time, right? I can only imagine a town hall meeting where we're having a let's play session where we're playing video games at the same time and everybody's watching. But hey, Blair, what about yourself? Anything you'd like to add on from the creative
Sure.
tool and tip standpoint?
So more as a resource. So we kept hearing as we, embarked on our ID&E journey a few years ago, that there were lots of observances, right? And we would have webcasts surrounding those. Locally, there might be events planned to celebrate that. And then we also have our, other business objectives like human resources, it's open enrollment time, and all these different things that could populate this enormous calendar. And all of our stakeholders being all different functions within the business, we've created a 30, 60, 90 calendar, which has an outlook for that, kind of like one chunk at a time, so that you can plan in advance for observances. And I found with partnering with leadership to create meaningful messaging, like Veterans Day is coming up, and different observances, we can kind of look ahead and plan a little bit better, and also find, different, events that are upcoming that we can kind of partner them with, sponsor them with, and that sort of thing. But we share it with leaders within the organization, and they've been really happy with it. Not that the information wasn't out there before, but you were going to 5 different places for it. So now it's each month we do a Leaders Digest email, which has news for our leaders, and that includes a link to that calendar. We've gotten really good feedback.
Oh, nice. So, what is that calendar in? Like,
it's called Leaders Digest. So for people leaders within the organization, so the messaging's a little bit different, to encourage employees to participate in that, or trainings that are coming up, deadlines. Hard, fast deadlines are included there too. But, we want to keep that corporate thread intact, right? We want to stay aligned, and we're able to do that through that calendar.
Absolutely. I was wondering if you could share what technology the calendar is built in, because I know people use a lot of different things for editorial calendars, from spreadsheets to Airtables to whatnot. But is there a particular one that you're using for yours?
So the one we share is generated into a PDF, so it is printable for our audience. But internally, our team uses just a Teams group. We use we call it the real editorial calendar, because there's so many. There's so many out there. So that's what our team uses.
That makes sense. Yeah, because Teams does have that capability to create calendars in it and tasks and whatnot. And it's great. I think the point of it was right to kind of creative tools is kind of getting away from the today and getting more into the future, and what's coming up in the future, so we could start planning around that and incorporating that into what we're starting to create. So yeah, thank you all for your thoughts and your answers on those. We have a few things in the Q&A side of the fence. I think, Blair, this might be for you, because you have frontline workers that you talked about. But can you share any ways where we could creatively connect with frontline workers to ensure that they're getting communications and engagement?
Yeah, so, it kind of goes back. Sorry?
I just said thank you to Mackenzie who asked that question. Sorry.
Sure. So I think it goes back to, again, that connection, that human connection, that we know that's going to relay the message. It becomes a conversation. They can ask questions. So we've really just tried to equip frontline supervisors with the information that they need. Again, it's hard to measure if they're opening emails. It's hard to measure if they're watching, a webcast that we're sharing, because there may be 30 frontline employees in a room, but only one login, right? So we can assume, and we've even tried, hey, let us know how many people are watching with you, right after COVID. But, it's more about, again, equipping their frontline supervisors. We know they're already having conversations weekly, hopefully daily, and just kind of sliding into that, but really prioritizing what we send them because they have so much they have to take care of. So just being respectful of that.
Absolutely. Thank you for that too. Like, and I think it's like incredibly important. I mean, we work with organizations that have like frontline folks, and the level of trust that they have for their supervisors versus corporate is
Oh,
much
yeah.
different. So
Yep.
I think you definitely want to kind of go through like their managers or their supervisors. And Mackenzie, I'll also say that if there's a follow up, feel free to ask it in the Q&A as well. I'll also ask our other panelists if there's any other ideas that they'd like to add on to that question, to that answer.
I mean, I'll just add a little, like, sort of an example of, like, I 100% agree. I think frontline, the cascade is probably the best way to engage those teams and those workers. Because they listen, and sometimes they don't have time to go check email, they don't have time to go read the internet, and so that is dedicated time with their manager where they are listening to the messages that are shared with them. So we sort of also have to make sure that we are giving those messages to those managers in a timely way, and so every Monday, that's something that we do, is we send out something to a certain level of people manager that is like, here are the messages for the week, here's what is happening, here are the product launches, here are some of, like, these are the things that you need to be talking about in your team meetings. Goes out to all managers, but it's especially helpful for those frontline managers, and that's something we just share in a group on Slack every Monday.
Excellent. That's so true. I think it's important to like separate them out as like different audiences, because if you think about when you're like writing your emails, when you're writing your intranet articles or updates and the talking points, you're not. It's really hard to write for all audiences. And who are you actually like writing for? Is it like really upper management leadership? Because they take in information much differently than frontline workers as well. Right. Cool. I think I'll ask the next question. This one is good for all of you. So in Oksana asks, in terms of personal results, what do you feel the most rewarding career of an internal communicator would look like? And what would you consider its highest peak? And you could all like arm wrestle, see who goes first on this one. So,
That's a great question.
yeah. What's most rewarding in your job is essentially what it kind of falls down to, I think.
I can
Yeah.
start with this.
Yeah.
I can volunteer myself, but I think the most rewarding thing as a communicator is how much stakeholder trust can you develop. And that stakeholder is both the people who, on behalf of whom you are doing the messaging, and the ones that you are doing the messaging to. It's a small incident comes to mind. We were doing this, like I was moderating a Q&A session with two of our HR business partners. And this was about it was about a policy change that raised a lot of eyebrows. It wasn't immediately seen as a good thing. So I was doing so I had two people partners with me who I was doing the Q&A with. And after the session, two people reached out to me and they said, thank you for doing the Q&A the way you did it, because it felt like you were our advocate. You were not trying to basically give them questions that they would want to answer. You were advocating for the people. You were asking the questions that were on our mind. That's what makes a rewarding communicator's career for me. How much trust can you foster both ways?
That's such a fantastic answer. I appreciate that very much. And it must be a pinnacle to like, be that person where everyone trusts, because as an internal communicator, I think most of our thoughts are we're just communicating in like one direction, when I think we're communicating in all directions. And we need to trust the people we're getting communications from. So thank you. Does anybody else want to jump in on that? What's the high of being an internal communicator?
Yeah, I agree with the Teep there in terms of that. We are there to help build credibility for the business and for leadership, senior leadership at times. And if we take the time to get to know them on a personal level, I think it makes it so much easier, right? And they don't forget, as they move on. I mean, we as communicators know that handwritten thank you is everything. And if you get one of those from someone that you've gained their trust, their respect, because this is not in everyone's wheelhouse. I mean, we truly do have a craft, and I agree with the Teef. When you can have their trust, help them, generate kind of their own persona in a way, help them kind of understand themselves a little bit better. So
Fantastic. Thank you.
Yeah, completely. It's funny, Blair, you said not everybody can do this and not everybody even wants to, which
right.
is, we did a survey at an offsite and it was like, whose job would you least like to have? It was me and the CEO. Like, everybody's like, my job's not that bad. Come on, people. But I mean, I would say, I've sort of had, in my role, I was hired as the first head of internal communications for the company. And so I have been able to build a function. And I think, to me, that is sort of like the pinnacle of my career. I've been able to take everything that I've learned through like my 20-year journey of employee facing initiatives and projects and programs and actually be able to, okay, I've seen what works. I've seen what doesn't work. Now I get to build it. I get to like build what I think is going to work for this company based on the audience and based on the company and based on, the working model. So to me, I think being able to build a function, but also just build programs and things like that carry on when you're gone. So things that people are still using 20 years down the road, it's that, foundation building that I think really is what I would say is sort of like the pinnacle of a career.
That's fantastic. I think it's touching everyone's hearts right now as you say that. Not only building it from scratch with all of the experience that you've had in your prior roles, but then seeing it go on as like a legacy past you, which is pretty wild to see, right? Like you visit Thumbtack 30 years from now and be like, oh yeah. Wow, they're still doing that coffee series or whatnot,
Yeah,
right?
Exactly.
It's incredibly cool. And then having the job position of the job position that no one wants.
Yeah.
You're able to thrive
Love my job.
in an environment where people don't want, because I think that keeps you in a place that's different than everyone else. And, because we don't want to be the same as everyone else either. Right. So let's go after the jobs that are more difficult, because I don't want to jest about it, because it is a difficult job, right? I think, and especially you realize you're, like a tech company, right? Like a lot of times we launch products for the external world, and it's like, oh, that's cool. Like you get to, see this external like product out there. But here you all are launching products for your internal world. Your audience is like sitting next to you. Your audience is your boss. It's different than when it's like someone out there that you don't actually see or work with every day. So it is a hard job.
I just want to add an anecdote that I feel like I've built for quite a while at my company, which is, as I continually say, a bunch of engineers. So when I would talk with an engineer, it gets really technical really fast coming out of their mouths. And I said, well, here, let me do it. And I give them a draft and they said, oh, I'm no good at writing. And I said, that's why I have my job and you have yours. So I always feel good about that.
Absolutely. We all have our like superpowers, and it's like,
right.
we bring them together and it forms like amazing, teamworks, right?
Yeah. You give me the bullets, I'll create the story.
Exactly.
Exactly. Right. We have like 2 minutes left, and I think we'll just kind of go to a quick speed round. I'd love to ask one final last question. Like, what are just any kind of last minute like tidbits or words of wisdom that you'd like to impart to our audience today before we close out this session? Audrey, we'll start with you and we'll go backwards from there from this conversation.
Yeah, it's something that it's my best advice to myself too, and I think all of you know this, but it's sometimes hard to remember. But I always ask myself, what does Cheryl in accounting need to know? I've created this this persona, Cheryl in accounting. In my company, she's not the average person, but it's easy to talk in overly technical language, but I always come back to Cheryl. Will she understand this message? So if so, good. So.
Perfect, beautiful. Because it's like when you're writing for everyone, you're like writing for no one, right?
Right.
Right. Yeah, Blair, would you like to jump in on next? What one tidbit you'd like to share?
Sure, and I think it's been kind of a theme that there's that human element, and don't forget that we're employees too, and what makes us tick, and what parts of our mission are we connected to, and make connections with others. I think will lead to an enjoyable work life.
Excellent. Live connections with others.
Yep.
Absolutely. Atif, what about yourself?
I'm just going to build on what Blair said, which you would have seen pretty much in everything that I said during this panel today. Relationships over process. Every day, every second, no process or procedure matters when it comes to relationships, connection, and the human element. Always give more value to that, and that's what will lead to that inner satisfaction of being a communicator.
Absolutely. Relationship first. Love that. And JD, last but not least, any tips?
Exactly. Yes, and
Yes, and.
I mean, all of that definitely big plus one. I think one of the big things, and I tell a lot of people and tell my team that, like, if we are not listening, if we are not spending half of our time like reaching, trying to find context, researching, listening to people, then we're not communicating. We're just pushing out information. Communication is two ways. And so as communicators, you have to listen to all of the information that is out there, and then decide and determine sort of then, what is the best message to the best audience and the best, sort of deliverer of that message. But if you don't have all of that information, if you're not talking to people and establishing those relationships, you're not going to be a good communicator.
Absolutely. Could have said it better. They listen. That's why we have two of these and one of these, right? That's what they say, right?
Yep. Yeah.
Thank you so much, all of you. Atif, Blair, Audrey, JD, for sharing your wisdom here. Thank you to Contact Monkey for this fabulous event and amazing cast of speakers throughout the day. And thank you all for joining. Really appreciate you. We're sending you our best. And I think, Mitili, if there's any way we could share the Q&A with our team, maybe there's another way we could answer some of the questions that we didn't get to. But in the meantime, thank you all and have a great day.
Thanks, everyone.
Wow, what an interesting panel discussion.